Hello and good afternoon. My name is Kit Cabello of Heartlands Media. Today we're conducting a very special interview here at the Q4 radio station. You can listen to Heartlands Media every Saturday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. We also have a website, www.heartlandsmedia.com. And for our special guest, we have none other than Illinois State Representative Litesa Wallace, and she was also the Lieutenant Governor candidate with the Daniel Biss campaign, who is a current Illinois State Senator as well. So, Litesa Wallace, thank you so much for joining Heartlands Media.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it.
So, as an Illinois State Representative, can you at least introduce yourself to our audience and give us a background to who you are and your career here in Illinois politics?
Yes, so I'm a state representative for the 67th District. I've been representative since July of 2014. Prior to that, I was a single mom working on her doctoral degree. I have a background in human services and higher education, and that's come to inform the work that I've been able to do in the legislature as vice chair of the Human Services Committee and chair of the Economic Justice and Equity Committee. Actually, I founded that committee in 2017 in the legislature. And I've moved forward with working on a number of issues. And I've just had a really great 4 years. Difficult 4 years, but I think that there's been some triumph.
So, the one thing I always talk about here on the show, and even on Q4 Radio as well, and that's the impact of money in politics. Across the board, Democratic voters, Republican voters, independent voters all agree that money in politics is crippling our democracy. So what I want to ask you is this. What have you seen in regards to money in politics playing a role in past elections, and how do we combat big money in this day and age to where the person with the most money always wins?
Well, the only way to do that is with true campaign finance reform. It's something that my running mate, Senator Biss, has been working on for years. It's something that a number of grassroots organizations have been working on for years. We have to move forward with that. I think we're posed right now to actually have some major impact on that particular issue. As we sit here today, we are going into what will be the most expensive gubernatorial race in the history of the nation, not just the state of Illinois. And that shows us that we must do something about the role that money plays in our politics. It simply is stating right now that if you were born without certain resources, or if you didn't make certain resources along the way, you won't be able to serve the public. And I think that's indeed a real problem.
What is the danger of having our government run by billionaires and millionaires and those connected with Wall Street or the big banks? How does that really affect our current democracy? And in the long run, how do we bring in real reform, though? How do we make sure that the era of big money doesn't remain?
So the first part of your question is, what does that role look like when we continue to see individuals with the most money win? It means that policy will be impacted by that money. We continue to have conversations in the state legislature and even in the U.S. Congress about the role of profit over people. And I also believe that it's very difficult to empathize to a point. Empathy only goes so far. And so we have people who are creating policy and voting on policy, or executors of policy, who don't have the lived experiences that you and I might have. It's difficult to sometimes figure out how you're going to make it to the end of the month. You know, that's an experience that many people who are born into resources, or those who've made it over time, they don't have that connection anymore. You asked, the second part was, how do we actually reform it? You see some examples of that throughout the country, whether there's public matching of campaign finances, or I just learned about voucher systems that are taking places in some parts of the country, where individuals literally get a voucher that they can give to their candidate of choice. But we have to have the political will, especially here in Illinois, especially after the most expensive gubernatorial race takes place, to say that this is not the path that we want our politics to continue on.
Now, I think what a lot of people want to know is, does Illinois have anything like that? And if not, why is there resistance towards it, or why hasn't it really been implemented here in our state?
Right. We currently do not. Senator Biss is supporting a measure in the Senate, and Representative Kelly Cassidy, along with myself, are supporting a bill. It's House Bill 5531. They're actually, by the time some of these things air, I think there will have been a hearing on that particular bill. So I hope that people pay attention to what's happening in the state legislature as we continue to push the issue for campaign finance reform and some form of public option.
Now, let's actually rewind back the clocks to the primary. It's been over a month since March 20th. It's quite clear at the end of the day, J.B. Pritzker is the nominee.
Yes.
But let's talk about the Biss-Wallace campaign. What did you learn along that way, campaigning across Illinois, and what lessons can progressives, independents learn when they're taking on establishment candidates?
Right. So I learned just how far I can push myself personally, but I also learned that individuals throughout the state are thirsty to have candidates that have their own experiences. They, I learned from voters that family is just as important, obviously, to them as it was for Daniel and I. And for them to see two candidates who are middle class, who are actively parenting, who have the same values and the same experiences that they do. I learned that voters were very eager to see that take place. I also learned that as progressives, until we are able to combat the role of money in politics, we're going to have to take that extra step. It's volunteering and phone calls and all of those things, but it's also the ability to give whatever small amount you're able to give to make your candidate more viable. So whether it's the jar of pennies that you have somewhere, whether it's the $5 that you saved from not going to Starbucks, hopefully you're not going right now. So maybe it's that $5 that you saved on that latte, putting that toward your candidate of choice. That's how you beat the establishment, with your actions, with your vote, and with maybe just a few of your dollars.
Now, I think a lot of people, especially those who live out of Illinois, they don't really understand Illinois as a whole, because there's Cook County, and most of the Democratic Party has its investment in Cook County. But for the most part, a lot of the counties here in Illinois have been abandoned by the Democratic Party. So when you and Senator Daniel Biss were campaigning all across the state, what is the current state of Illinois? Because right now we are still recovering from the two-year budgetary crisis between Governor Bruce Rauner and Speaker of the House Michael Madigan, because that clearly left a huge impact not only here in Cook County, but all across Illinois. What did you see firsthand?
Well, you see abandoned businesses. You see neighborhoods where schools just barely have enough to open their doors every day. What the overwhelming message has been throughout the state is that there are more people in our state than those who live in Chicago. I'm proud to have been part of a ticket that was suburban, Cook, and Winnebago County. It brought to the table a perspective that other candidates just probably did not have. And it gave us the opportunity to be able to connect to those people who are not part of the one county that seems to get so much discussion and that really does control the political outcomes in Democratic primaries. So the overwhelming message is we exist outside of Chicago. That's what I heard from voters across the state.
And let's also look at another aspect of Illinois, and it's, even though Illinois is quoted as being a blue state, we have a long sad history of segregation and racial discrimination, and it's always been towards working class communities, communities of color. It's prevalent. It's in our history, especially as a state. It's just not only here in Cook County, but it's all across. So, as an elected official, how do we break the hyper segregation here in Illinois, and how do we tear down these barriers, and what kind of organization will it take to make a real movement of social change, of really addressing these issues that can no longer be ignored?
Right. So we have to be as intentional with policies to destroy the discrimination as previous policymakers were in creating policies that created the discrimination, the disparities, the inequity that we continue to see. So that's going to mean voters throughout the state of Illinois pushing legislators, pushing policymakers to address those concerns. So you may not live in a particular part of the state, but if you are engaged in state politics, and I hope that you're paying attention to what's happening, then you're calling a legislator who's outside of your own district to say, you need to vote on this particular issue, whether it is the Equal Rights Amendment to finally ratify it in the state of Illinois, or a bill that just came forth a few months back with Representative Ford asking for equal pay for African Americans. When you need to call those legislators when you see that they're voting against policies that can undo some of the inequity that we've seen over time. And then finally, we have to have a shift in attitude of those who are in office. We can't continue to have people who are in office who think that some communities deserve less than other communities, because that then dictates what they're willing to invest in those particular communities. It's time out for all of that. We are going to have to force individuals to hear our voices and to vote in the way that creates equity. And no party has a monopoly on any of the isms you can think of.
And let's also look at the role of women, because right now in this day and age of Me Too and Time's Up, we're seeing more women get involved politically, running for office. What does it say about our current system and how it's being run, and what is the potential for women to be part of the political process here in the United States?
Well, I am happy that women are putting our collective voices to the max, that we're speaking out against the things that have deterred us from being in public spaces for so long. I think the one way that we're going to continue to move that forward is if we have allies from a number of communities. We're also going to have to reach back to the next generation. We need to be bringing our daughters to work. Our daughters need to see that they have a space. And then I will also say, because intersectionality is so important, we have to also be looking at children of color, no matter what their gender is, and empowering them to be able to take on these spaces and take part in government and take on these roles. I think for so long, those voices have intentionally been silenced, and now is the time for us to continue to echo each other and do that work that our foremothers and our forefathers were doing.
Now, when Harlan's Media was covering the She Votes forum between Democratic primary challengers at UIC, an issue that was brought up during the debate was obviously the current environment in Springfield. Essentially, I think what a lot of people want to know is what will it take to really have for there to be a safe spot for women to be involved politically and not deal with harassment? Because after hearing about all the allegations that are happening in Springfield, I think a lot of women and a lot of men are upset at how Springfield is being run.
So again, we have to believe women when they come forward. Men are going to have to also play a critical part in holding individual harassing behavior and holding individuals accountable for that behavior. We can no longer allow for people to laugh off things that make other people uncomfortable, and sometimes that means calling it out. And people joke and people do things that may not have been intentional, but once a person comes forward and says that this was the impact that action had on me, we have to believe them, and we have to work to create a better culture so that people aren't continued to be hurt by any type of ism. And really the sexual harassment that we see anywhere is rooted in sexism, and we've got to start to address the power and oppression that is part of creating that culture of harassment.
Now, here in the city of Chicago, we're still dealing with the aftermath of how Rahm Emanuel handled the Laquan McDonald shooting, as well as numerous other incidences of the Chicago Police Department abusing its power. There's the infamous black sites in which people were tortured. And, for a long time, the Chicago Police Department was turning a blind eye to the corruption in its own department. So since you are outside of Cook County, you represent another district altogether. How do we bring in real police reform, not only here in Cook County and the city of Chicago, but all across the state, in order so that people of color or low-income working-class people aren't harassed or have to deal with a corrupt police department? What kind of reforms are needed, and can it be done with this current government in Springfield?
Well, we did move forward with some reforms in 2015. My own district has dealt heavily with unarmed Black men being killed either by police or by individuals who were armed security guards. We've seen quite a bit of that over the last several years. In 2015, we passed, however, the community policing bill, which is based on the 21st Century Policing Task Force that then President Obama put in place. So we implemented some things, they're continuing to roll out, and I don't know that we'll see what the outcomes of those are just yet. But we put in measures to try to curtail racial profiling. I wrote a bill that got included in the omnibus to include training for implicit racial bias, that police officers need to undergo that training. And for the last 3 years, I've introduced legislation to address sexual misconduct amongst police, because that's a form of misconduct that goes underreported, that individuals don't talk about, and we certainly have not had the type of investigations necessary to get out the bad actors and make sure that they're held accountable. So I think there is an environment to do that work in Springfield, but we just have to continue to push forward. I'm still trying to move a bill related to independent investigation of officer-involved sexual assault. And I hope that maybe if people hear and see that during this show, that they'll reach out and try to get some movement on that particular legislation.
And real quick, what's the number or place where people can find out about that online or social media? Do you have it on hand where people can reach out to it?
If people go on to ilga.gov, under House and Members, they can find my name and they will see that bill. I believe it's House Bill 5623. I filed a number of pieces of legislation this year, but I'm pretty sure that is it's somewhere around there, that it's that bill. Oh no, it's probably House Bill 4962. I apologize for that. But a number of bills that I have filed try to address accountability and police reform.
And let's also look at this whole turnout in regards to this midterm 2018 election cycle. It's quite clear that the Democrats can win some key seats, not only here in the state of Illinois, but it's going to be a nationwide thing. However, here in Illinois, there's a lot of people critical of the Illinois Democratic Party due to some of its leaders, most notably Speaker of the House Michael Madigan. So currently, can the Democratic Party still take key seats and be part of this blue wave? And what will it take to really bring establishment Democrats to the progressive side of issues? Because for the most part, they seem to be resistant or hesitant in embracing progressive policies, or if they do embrace them, it's only half measured.
Well, I do think that Illinois will benefit from the blue wave. And I want to go back to the point that I made before about holding people accountable, making the phone calls, going and supporting legislators who are progressive. Make sure you're supporting them very strongly, so that they don't feel that they're on their own when they do take brave and bold action in Springfield. And then you have to push those who are not acting in the way that you would want in terms of progressive policy making. So it really is incumbent upon every citizen of Illinois to be engaged in what's happening. I know it's hard. Most of us are working, balancing all types of things, whether it's a busy career, children, hobbies, whatever, but we have to be engaged, we have to be involved. That's the way that you move the needle further left.
There are still many people who are critical of establishment Democrats due to the fact that they hold on to policies that are neoliberal. And for the most part, many progressives think that the neoliberal establishment Democrats are trying to hijack this progressive movement. Can these establishment Democrats be seen as allies? And if they are, what kind of influence can they bring in?
Wow. So there has to be a fine line, right? There are times when establishment Democrats can be allies of progressive Democrats, because ultimately we're part of the same party, right? We're just different factions. But I do think that as progressives, we have to be very careful to not have all or nothing mindsets. And we also have to be mindful of the neoliberal influence in the hijacking of our concepts and our names and titles, the way that we present our ideology to the world. We have to be really careful and vigilant about who's using those words, who's using those concepts, and are they really indeed standing on principles of social justice, economic justice, racial and gender justice. If they're not, then we need to call it out. But you see that by looking at what they stood for over time. What have they worked on over time? And you can see clear distinctions between neoliberal policies and progressive policies. But we have to call it out when people are commandeering language just to benefit the status quo.
Now, Heartland's Media, we have reached out to J.B. Pritzker's campaign. For the most part, we haven't got a response back, but we've also heard that he's has a progressive outreach, trying to reach out to progressive groups and trying to court the Daniel Biss supporters as well as Chris Kenney supporters. What concerns do you have for this governor's race here in Illinois? As you mentioned before, and as we said before on our show, this is going to be the most expensive governor's race in American history. It's going to be a prime example of seeing the influence of money in politics. What concerns do you have for this midterm election cycle, at least for this key seat for governor's race?
Well, I do have concern as to what the voter turnout will be. The narrative right now is the clash of the titans, basically, two billionaires going head to head. I do hope that the Pritzker campaign does continue to do outreach. I do find it, I'm going to be very honest, I do find it quite ironic that there would have to be a progressive outreach position or duties if you're a progressive candidate. And I think that goes back to what I was saying before, making sure that people are not misappropriating our language and our terms to get the attention that comes with that, but maybe not also doing the work. And I'm not sure. I can't say that Mr. Pritzker won't do those things, but I think we just have to be very mindful, and we need to continue to watch and hold accountable and make our requests heard. And I think one of the number one things I'm hearing that progressives after this cycle really want is campaign finance reform.
And of course, right now we're dealing with the budgetary crisis, or dealing with the aftermath of the budgetary crisis. I think it's really important for at least voters to know, okay, we're out of the woods with the budgetary crisis. We have, at this point, some stability. But let's say if there was to be a new governor, what's it going to really take to get Illinois back into stable ground and ensure that the exodus of people leaving our state stops? How do we get this state functioning again? What will it take for us to bring in revenue and to keep the state afloat?
Well, we often hear about infrastructure, and I say that it's not just the physical infrastructure, but we have to have human services infrastructure. Families and communities need to be supported. They have to know that if I have a disability or if I'm differently able, here are the services that I can access that will help me live a full and integrated life. If I am a person who has children and I need an education system that is working well and properly, we need to know that their resources are going to be there to properly fund our schools. The way that has to happen is to move forward with a progressive income tax. We cannot sit back and let that become an issue that we get placated, and that becomes just, a distant memory after this general election happens. We have to make sure that that stays at the forefront of everything. So one way of doing that is to continue to engage people. There are many groups that are continuing to work on the progressive income tax, and that will create the revenue to support the communities and the families that we need supported, and that prevents people from moving out of state. We have to have strong human services, education, and higher education infrastructure to make that happen, to keep people here.
Now, of course, in order to do that, it also means taking on the neoliberal establishment as well as the influence of neoliberalism. And I think for the most part, a lot of people don't understand just how neoliberalism, its policies, just the function of the system itself, what it plays in our society. So what has been the real social cost of having neoliberal policies implemented on working class families?
Wow. I mean, we've seen the increasing need to support profit over people. We continue to see individuals who don't make a living wage We are continuing to see social services that are not invested in. We have communities where schools are just closed up, and that have been those communities have been completely divested from, because often neoliberal policies mean that it's about profit, it's about greed, and it's not about the everyday citizen. So we are indeed paying a social cost, and you can look across many cities in the state of Illinois to see what those policies that have been in place for so long, the status quo that's been in place for so long, what the results are for certain communities.
Now, even if there is to be a Democratic win, especially like on a national level, there is some concern that the Democratic Party won't follow through on some of the progressive policies. And if it does follow through, it'll be only half measures. And there's always been a talk of Dem exit, Dem enter. If the Democratic Party fails to really embrace some of these progressive policies, is there a concern to where eventually people will leave the Democratic Party, form third parties, four parties? I mean, what can the Democratic Party do to really keep progressives and independents?
That's always a concern, that there could be a third party that arises and causes additional fracturing of what the votes would be. I think one way that our party can continue to hold itself accountable is to listen, actually listen to the voters. Voters are saying time and time again what they want to see, what policies they want to have enacted. And we can no longer ignore that. And I think as we move further and further into people being heightened and aware of what's happening, what their legislators are doing, what their elected officials are doing, I think that creates the mechanism to put on the pressure and hold people accountable. But what we can't do is become complacent because we have a number of Democrats holding office. We have to really be paying attention to what it is they're pushing and supporting.
And real quick, a two-part question. What do you want to say to people who refuse to get involved and vote and are critical of the system? And secondly, for our viewers who are watching us on CanTV, where can they learn more about you and find you online?
So I say, if you're not involved, and whatever level of involvement you can spare your time to do, then you lose your right to be super critical. You can be critical, find out the areas that need to be worked on, and then go work on that. If it could be one thing. So I hope that people will do that. I hope that they feel empowered and encouraged to do that. But in terms of staying in touch with me, my name is Litesa Wallace. It's Litesa. And all social media platforms, that's how you can find me, at Litesa Wallace. And my website is LitesaWallace.com.
All right. Representative Litesa Wallace, thank you so much for joining Heartland
Thank you
Media.
so much for having me today.
We're very grateful to have you here. And clearly, the fight for a better future is a long road, but so long as we have progressive candidates like you, or representatives like you in Springfield, it's getting that much closer. And so, that being said, thank you for being a guest.
Thank you for having me.
And to our viewing audience, if you like what we do, check us out on our webpage, heartlandsmedia.com. We have a special link in there where if you see somebody that we should interview, or a group, or some activist group, you can just go onto our webpage and check it out and type it in there. And other than that, peace to everyone. Let's all do what we can to build a better future so that we can all have a better society. Peace.
You're watching Hard Lens Media.